I feel like he was like, I'm just the cheese, you're the blood. Okay, you do the blood stuff, I do the cheese stuff. I'm like, dude.
Honestly, it was such a rat move.
I wonder how many times we're gonna make rat puns.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today, we are covering House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 1. I immediately felt right at home when we got both gruesome, horrific murders and some steamy sex scenes from AliCole right off the bat, which proves that the show really can do both.
But should they?
Yes. Keep it up. Before we get started today, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language may be used and triggering events may be discussed. So please adjust accordingly.
Specifically for this episode, serious triggering events, okay?
I totally agree. Anyways, actually, you know what? The worst part is that they kicked the dog. I don't even care about the kids. Just kidding.
No, you didn't, Lorraine.
I do.
No, you didn't. She's not kidding. She loves dogs. No, she loves dogs more than kids. Oh my God, that's so funny.
I digress. Housekeeping updates. We are continuing with our Crown of Midnight deep dives. These are spoiler-free and in-depth because neither of us has read the Throne of Glass series before. If you want to read the series with us, then so far, we cannot recommend it enough. It's excellent. So check those out. Also, in previous House of the Dragon episodes, we sometimes mixed up Jason and Tywin Lannister, especially when we got to the Green Council by the later episodes, and we probably referred to him as Jason instead of Tywin on accident. So,
which, in our defense, totally fair. I believe that they're twins, and even if they're not twins, they're played by the same actor. Yeah. So, very reasonable of us to mix that up, but we do apologize. We're going to try to be more
cognizant of our
cognizant,
characters.
Yes. We'll be better in the future. So if you have listened to that and you were angry, so sorry, but we're just human.
Also, if you are enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving us a review and subscribing. This helps us immensely, and we want to continue growing our community. All right, well, let's get this episode started. So first off, before we do any analysis or summaries or anything, what were your initial impressions and thoughts for this first episode? How did you feel about it?
Ooh, through most of the episode, I liked it. I thought it was good. And understandably, it is just the first episode of the season. So I thought it was a little slow, right? I thought it was just a reintroduction back into the world after we've been off for almost 2 years. But then the last 10 minutes started. Again, just to clarify, we have not read the books. We try really hard to avoid spoilers. So everything that happens in the show is brand new to us. It unfolds and is revealed to us in real time. And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. At no point did I really know where that was going to go. To be honest, I thought they were going to run into Aemond and they were going to have a good battle and maybe Aemond would get wounded, but he would be okay or something like that. I did not think it was going to go in that direction at all. So I was absolutely dead. I was also very pleased to go back to Winterfell. Winterfell feels like home to me. Just the wall and even the casting of Criston Stark. He just seems like such a Stark.
It's the northern accent.
Yes, and just the tone and everything. I just loved it. I was like, oh, baby, we're home. We're home.
Home. I 100% agree. Yeah. I had no idea what was going to happen. I got a bad feeling as soon as Helaena talked about the rats, but I didn't even think anything was necessarily going to happen in this episode because previously it would take a couple episodes for her visions to come to fruition, but this time they turned it around so quick. So
I know. Whoa. Yeah, I think we were all a little caught off guard.
I think the most shocking things were the blood and cheese thing, Alicent and Criston Cole. I mean, I guess you were like, do you wonder what's going to happen in the last episode? And
I
I
was
was
gonna
like,
say,
I don't know. He's just really duty bound to her. And I was like, oh shit, this is beyond duty.
I was shocked but not surprised when I saw that, honestly.
That makes sense.
Because we had this exact conversation, and we'll talk about it when we get to that scene too, but I felt that was foreshadowed in season 1.
Yeah. But yeah, so much. Jace's hair also.
Oh, super important. The baby had a glow up. He had a glow up.
Sure. He looks so much better with the new hair. I was like, why did y'all do him dirty in the first season with the haircut?
I know. He looks a lot like Kit Harington, who played Jon Snow.
Yeah, with the hair. Facially speaking, not really, but the hair definitely made him look like that in a way.
Yeah.
So
agreed. And try not to get too attached to anyone, though, because this season has already reminded me that anyone and everyone can die, so don't get attached.
Oh my God, for real. Ugh, we'll see which key characters end up dying in battle.
Or not even in battle, just in their beds.
Yeah, that's true. Just being murdered. All right. Thank you for your impressions. So without further ado, let's dive into the main part of our episode. So Addison, please update us with the state of the realm for our episode summaries.
Happily. Well, not happily. Unhappily, but I will do my best. If I wasn't scared of rats before, I certainly am now. We open this episode back in a place that feels like home, Winterfell. Jacaerys treats with Cragen Stark. As they look over the wall, Cragen commits 2,000 Greybeards to Rhaenyra's cause. They are then interrupted when a raven arrives with news of Lucerys' death. Would that he were the king indeed. Back at Dragonstone, Rhaenys and Meleys land after patrolling the blockade in the Stepstones. Daemon insists that they immediately head to King's Landing to take on that old hoary bitch Vhagar. Rhaenys refuses, and they argue about what Rhaenyra the queen commands and how she is handling her grief over the loss of Lucerys. While Rhaenys is in Dragonstone, Corlys is back in Driftmark. We are introduced to Alan. Alan gives him an update on reinforcements for the blockade and repairs for his ship. Corlys then thanks him for dragging his body out of the sea when he took that dagger to the neck. Back in King's Landing, Alicent and Cole are getting hot and heavy, and Aegon decides that it's bring your kid to work day. In the small council, Alicent and Otto are trying seriously to address the impending war at hand, but Aegon's attention is elsewhere. We see an adorable Jaehaerys, don't get attached, terrorizing Tywin Lannister, and Aegon joins in on the fun when he orders Sir Tywin to be his noble steed. Tywin is only spared when Alicent steps in. As Alicent leaves the small council, we have a brief but menacing encounter between Alicent and Larys. Larys has rooted out all the little spiders in Lady Myssaria's web of spies and replaced them with staff he has handpicked. In a heartbreaking sequence, Rhaenyra finds what remains of Arax and Lucerys washed ashore on a beach. The discovery finally allows her to accept that Lucerys is truly gone, and Addison throws herself on the ground and weeps as Rhaenyra sobs over what is left of Lucerys and Arax. It was so sad.
That was the worst scene.
The worst scene for me was when Jacaerys comes home. That was the worst.
Oh my God, you're so right. Yeah.
Yep.
Just the agony, though. I mean, she didn't even say anything, and you could just feel the devastation.
Oh,
I almost cried. I really did.
Oh, I did cry. I cried during the funeral. Oh. Absolutely. Agony is a good word. That's exactly how I feel. I feel broken. Okay. Okay. All hail King Aegon, the magnanimous? But seriously, who the fuck actually knows what that means? Aegon does his sincere best to be a good king as he listens to the plight of the small folk, but is still settling into his new rulership. Thankfully, Hightower, still the hand of the king, is there to guide him. As Aegon departs from the small council, he is stopped by Larys. Man, this guy needs a hobby other than lurking outside of rooms waiting for a chance to talk to the royal family. Anyways, he heavily implies to Aegon that if he wishes to set himself apart as a ruler, he may want to consider the mantra of out with the old and in with the new, and rid himself of Otto Hightower as hand of the king. Meanwhile, Alicent and Otto have a heated discussion where Alicent questions whether they want the same thing. Ultimately, they agree that they both desire the same outcome, but whether they will use the same methods to achieve that end remains to be seen. Back at Dragonstone, Sir Eric is searching incoming ships and finds Lady Mysaria. Most importantly, they have adjusted her accent this season, and for that, we are all grateful. But seriously, though, seriously.
Mm-hmm.
He brings her to Daemon, and to no one's surprise, Daemon is angry and blames her for the role she played in helping Aegon usurp the throne. He orders her to be thrown into a cell and treated like a traitor to the crown, despite Sir Eric's protests. Let me take a deep breath. 4 words. That's all Rhaenyra speaks in this episode. As she returns, she enters the battle room and utters these 4 words. I want Aemond Targaryen.
Oof.
I know. Jacaerys returns and begins updating his mother on how his meetings with Lady Arryn and Lord Stark, but breaks down. In an absolutely gut-wrenching scene, he and Rhaenyra embrace and grieve the loss of Lucerys. Daemon then sets forth his plan to exact revenge on Rhaenyra's behalf. As Team Black holds a funeral for Lucerys, Alicent goes to the Sept to grieve all that have been lost and lights candles in their honor, including Lucerys Velaryon. Later that evening, Cole and Aemond talk about the strategy of wars they would wish to enact, and of Alicent's cloud of judgment when it comes to handling Rhaenyra. They are interrupted by Otto, and he reminds Aemond of his place, and that if they are to win this war, patience and restraint are needed. Will Aemond heed this warning? I sincerely doubt it, but time will tell. As Aegon and Cole scheme, so does Daemon. Daemon arrives in his crying cloak, crying cloak. Took a little beat from Lorraine on that. Whoops. Daemon arrives in his crying cloak in King's Landing and connects with Blood, who takes him to Cheese. Daemon gives them a bag of gold and generic-ish instructions. A son for a son. Blood and Cheese make their way through the sewers and into the castle. Cheese finds Helaena with the children in her apartments. Instead of Sophie's choice, it's Helena's choice. Blood and Cheese demand that they tell her which child is a boy, and although Helaena hesitates, she eventually points to Jaehaerys. And in one of the most horrifying scenes yet to grace our screens, Blood and Cheese brutally kill and behead young Jaehaerys. Helaena, in a state of shock, grabs her daughter and in a panic makes her way to her mother's room. Helaena is in such a state that she doesn't even notice that Alicent and Cole are getting it on again. When Alicent asks her what has happened, she simply utters, "They killed the boy."
Oh my gosh. What a set of events.
I was not prepared.
All right. Thank you for those updates. There are obviously many key points to discuss. So to the small council we go for our analysis.
As always, we have to start off the small council with discussing the title of the episode. Now, I'm just going to start this by saying I am an absolute idiot. I didn't even look at the title of the episode before we started watching. And God fucking damn it, I wish I would have, because maybe I would have been able to prepare myself for what heinous shit was about to go down. Oh my God. When I went back and looked at it at the end of the episode, I was like, oh, okay. So the title of the episode is A Son for a Son. I think we all know what this title is about, but just in case, at the end of season 1, Lucerys is killed by Vhagar and Aemond. While I still contest that his death was an unfortunate and avoidable accident, it happened. Rhaenyra is understandably broken over this, and Daemon takes it upon himself to act. In this episode, he sets forth the chain of events with Blood and Cheese that ends with the gruesome death of Jaehaerys. Rhaenyra's son, Lucerys, for Aegon's son, Jaehaerys, a son for a son.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty explicit in what it's in reference to. It's a good title. Not going to lie, it's a good title and definitely encapsulates what the episode is about.
Right. And I think for perspective too, Rhaenyra had no idea how Lucerys died, right? They just know that it was Vhagar and Aemond, but they don't know that it was an accident. And so in their opinion, they're thinking this was an act of vengeance on Aemond's part. Moving forward in the episode, a son for a son, I mean, we originally assumed that based off of what Daemon says when he hires Cheese, that they're talking about Aemond. I was expecting something to happen to Aemond. I was not prepared when it was actually Jaehaerys that's dying. I was like, not oh my God.
Oh, I know. Well, and then when Cheese runs into Helaena, I thought it was going to take a turn. And honestly, I thought they were going to sexually assault Helaena. And that was going to be the tragedy of the episode. So then when they switch and kill Jaehaerys, I was like, I mean, of course, not that I was rooting for anything bad to happen to anyone, but I was like, whoa, that took plot turn after plot turn after plot turn.
Yeah. Well, even the fact that they found Helaena, because I thought they were going to find the maid, because Blood goes running after the maid. He's looking for her. And I was like, oh, she's found the maid and now they're going to murder the maid. That wasn't the case either. So many turns.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about more when we get there. It's so exciting to talk about, but We'll save it.
So the other thing that I thought was really freaking cool was the new intro that they have for the episodes in season 2. They have this beautiful tapestry being woven. And I think what I found it's supposed to depict the story of House of the Dragon, and the Song of Ice and
Mm-hmm.
Fire, I believe, is what that was about. I thought it was cool. Originally, I
Oh
was
my God. Yes. Okay. Because usually, I'm not going to lie, in season one, I skip through the intro every time. I watched it the very first episode, but it just didn't do anything for me. It wasn't as gripping as I feel like Game of Thrones was. But of course, since it's a new season, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And it was so freaking cool. And then the way the color would dye it and spread too.
Yes. Yeah.
I did notice, I think it's towards the end of the sequence, then they zoom out a little bit. You see Rhaenyra on the throne in black and presumably Aegon on the throne in green. So I think you're right. It does depict the Song of Ice and Fire, but it's really cool. I definitely will not be skipping it.
Same. I love the intro. Obviously, I love the intro music. So,
well, who doesn't? Who doesn't? It's iconic. All right. So, to the episode, we open this episode with the scene of a raven and it's flying. And where is he going? To Winterfell. And I was so excited to return back to Winterfell after, it's been, God, how many years since Game of Thrones? I miss that place. I miss the Northerners and how winter is always coming and how they're always like dark and the world's about to end, but they're so honorable. So I'm really glad that we got reintroduced, even if it's just for a short while in this episode. So at the end of season 1, we know that Rhaenyra sent Jacaerys to treat with Lady Jane Eyre in the Vale and then to treat with Criston Stark in Winterfell. So this is where we are in the timeline. It's probably a week, maybe 2. I'm not really sure how long it takes to get there and drag him back. But regardless, we're jumping right back in where we left off in season 1. So Jace and Criston, they have this talk as they're going up in the elevator to the top of the wall, and they come to this outpost, and they're having a discussion, obviously, about Criston Stark honoring his father's oath to Rhaenyra that he made way back when Viserys named her heir. And the ultimate conclusion of that conversation is, of course, in classic Stark fashion, he tells Jacaerys winter is coming. I believe the phrase that I picked up on was, "My gaze is forever torn between the north and the south." I was like, oh my God.
Yes. He was like, Starks never forget their oath, but you must know that my gaze is forever torn between the north and the south.
Of course, the Stark is going to honor his oath. So Criston does agree to honor the oath that his father swore to Rhaenyra. But because winter is coming, he needs his best men to man the wall and protect the wall. And so he commits to him, I believe it's about 2,000 graybeards, which is their nice way of saying they're older men. And of course, I mean, what is Jacaerys going to say? Obviously, he's going to accept any body that can hold a sword, right? And I will say the Stark are hardy folk. So even their graybeards are probably decent in a fight. I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
And so my impression of that conversation was that I felt that this is a way for the Starks to honor their oath, but also it solves a problem for them because if you'll recall, it's a very common theme for the Starks that, especially when winter comes, they never have enough food. They never have enough resources. And so men that are older that can no longer man the wall effectively or not really garrisoning any positions are just extra mouths to feast. So him promising the soldiers is a way to solve 2 problems. It still honors his oath and it helps relieve some of the pressure on their resources. I also wondered if perhaps it was a way for him to honor the oath but not fully commit to the conflict, because you have to imagine from Criston's perspective, this is not a normal war. This is a war where both sides have big ass fucking dragons. And you know what a dragon can do? It can level an entire fucking city with fire, right? Presumably Vhagar alone could wipe out the entirety of Winterfell. And so I took this as Stark taking an offensive and defensive position. If he has his best men there, he can protect against attacks and also presumably stay out of the conflict and not be invested fully. I mean, I also do believe that he is genuine, that he has a duty to protect everybody from more than just wildlings and weather. What were your thoughts on that?
I hadn't thought about it from Cragen's perspective, but that does definitely make sense. I was really looking at the parallels between the Targaryens and the Starks, because the Targaryens have the Song in Ice and Fire. That's their prophecy. The Starks have winter is coming.
Absolutely.
And before we even started anything in this episode, we have that monologue where Cragen Stark is telling Jason they're showing men being picked to man the wall.
Yes.
And be enlisted in the Night's Watch. And his whole speech is about duty is a sacrifice. But Torrhen Stark began the tradition by making an offering at the onset of winter, knowing that something horrific is to come. And even Cragen tells Jacaerys that dragons even refuse to cross the wall, right? And so from Cragen's perspective, he's like, yeah, you guys are having this feud about who's going to rule the Seven Kingdoms, but that's small potatoes, right? As you would say, that is not the biggest issue at hand right now.
Yeah.
They're like, there is some shit that's about to go down on the other side of this wall. Obviously, it takes hundreds of years to come to fruition and enter into the Game of Thrones time, but they still are aware of it. That is their prophecy, right? I kind of took it as him acknowledging that the conflict within the Targaryen family is important. However, he's way more concerned about defending the wall and ensuring that something far more evil does not come in to destroy Westeros.
Yes, it's very classic Stark fashion to remind everyone repeatedly that winter is coming and that they're the only thing that stands between what's beyond the wall and King's Landing. So I'm glad that Starks stay true to their nature.
True.
So at the end of that scene, a raven delivers a message and it's given to Cragen Stark. Although they don't tell us what it says on screen, it's heavily implied that it's news of Lucerys' death. That wraps up that scene. And then we're back at Dragonstone. So Addison's very happy. We get to see a really cool scene of Meleys flying into Dragonstone, landing in Dragonmont. And she dismounts and Daemon immediately is like, get your shit, let's go. Get back on your dragon. And she's like, why? Where are we going? What the fuck do you want? And so Daemon is just, God, he is so bloodthirsty. He is out for blood. And the funny thing is, I don't even think it's precipitated by the events with Lucerys. To be honest, he doesn't seem that broken up about Lucerys' death. He just wants an excuse to go light some people up, honestly.
Yeah, it was hard to tell. It seemed like he was just really caught up in getting vengeance in general. But you're right, he doesn't really mention Lucerys. He's like, we got to go get Aemond and Vhagar, which I was like, do you guys really think that your two dragons are going to take Vhagar? I mean, maybe, but it doesn't seem like a great course of action.
No.
Well, although he does say a son for a son, though, he mentions that to Rhaenys, like, oh, we can get Aemond and Vhagar. It'll be a son for a son situation. So I think he is, but he is much more overtaken by his emotion and desire to instigate some kind of action, I think.
I agree. So Daemon and Rhaenys have this brief exchange where they're sort of verbally sparring. Rhaenys refuses Daemon for several reasons. The first is, one, she's just fucking tired. She has been out patrolling the Stepstones and manning the blockade by herself, essentially. And she's tired. Meleys is tired. And more importantly, and this is something that I do really appreciate and respect about Rhaenys, she specifically calls Daemon out and says, is this what the queen has ordered? Is this what the queen has commanded? And of course, Rhaenyra hasn't. Rhaenyra's not even there, as is revealed in this scene. She's out, we know, in just a few scenes looking for Lucerys' body or remains or some evidence of Lucerys' death. And so Rhaenys calls Daemon out on that and is basically like, you can't just do whatever you want. You have to follow the queen's command. And I do appreciate that because I do feel that Daemon has a sense of entitlement to do whatever he wants because he's 1 degree removed from Rhaenyra. And I don't think it's necessarily that he wants to bend Rhaenyra to his will, so to speak, but he does want to have free reign to do whatever he wants. I mean, it's sort of like we discussed in season 1. Daemon has always wanted the privileges of ruling without the responsibilities of ruling. And so Rhaenyra being queen is the best of both worlds for him, right? He basically has full reign to do whatever he wants without actually having to do all the boring monarch shit that you have to do.
Right. He's becoming increasingly agitated because Rhaenyra has not returned. He's like, we need to go take action immediately. We need to do something. And I think the other part of that is Rhaenys also acknowledges the fact that Rhaenyra is grieving. And she reminds him of what it was like for them to learn about Lena's death through a raven and how she couldn't accept the reality of that until she had physically seen Lena's body. That is what Rhaenyra is obviously doing. And not only does Rhaenys defer to Rhaenyra's command, not Daemon's, but she also respects Rhaenyra for showing restraint at this time, I think, too. And that's something that Daemon is not for. Daemon's very quick to kind of a loose cannon, right? He wants to go get shit done immediately.
Well, and I think this is a good segue into a very important theme in this episode is that neither side wants to engage in war with the dragons. Once that restraint is broken, once someone uses a dragon in a battle or conflict, then it's over, right? Everyone's going to pull out their dragons. It's a little bit like mutually assured destruction. No one in the world wants to use a nuclear bomb in a conflict because once someone does, the retaliation is nuclear, and that ends badly for everyone. And so I think this sentiment is echoed by both sides, and we'll talk about that more in the small council scene back in King's Landing with the Greens too.
Yeah.
But I think that is really important. And I think Rhaenys recognizes the importance of doing their absolute best to avoid having to use dragons in the conflict. And of course, everyone knows it's inevitable. I mean, Aemond and Cole have an explicit conversation where they say, yes, it is inevitable. But I still think it's important that both sides are trying to avoid that because, as Rhaenyra said in season 1, she doesn't want to rule over Ash and Bone. And I'm sure neither do the Greens, presuming that they think they're going to win.
Right. This is the other thing. I think the other point for Daemon, too, had been the fact that he feels they wouldn't be in this position if Rhaenys had just flamed them when she had the chance. He's still very bent out of shape about the fact that we shouldn't even be here. The Greens usurp things. They deserve to die right then and there. And specifically to Rhaenys, you didn't do anything about it. And
yes,
I thought it was funny that when Rhaenys walked off at the end, he's like, fly with me. It is a command. And Rhaenys is like, would that you were the king? And then she just walks off. So
yes, that was a great.
It's interesting that she doesn't cower to Daemon. She's like, yeah, Daemon, okay, and then just goes about her business.
Yeah, I think Daemon is, to your point, is very angry about a lot of things because he literally blames everyone for the Greens usurping the throne. He blames Rhaenys, he blames Sir Eric, and he blames Mysaria for all the roles that they played. And so he just is really angry and wants to blame everyone for it happening. Yeah. So Daemon's mad and he's gonna act on it in a big way later in the episode. And then
I still forgive him. His transgressions are forgiven. Daddy
Daemon. Our father Daemon. Daddy.
Father Daddy Daemon.
Father Daddy Daemon. Yes. But promptly after this scene, we do get a very brief glimpse of Rhaenyra, and she's standing on a cliff and overlooking the ocean. Presumably, this is the ocean over which Arax and Lucerys were lost. And that's the beginning of her story arc in this episode. Obviously, there's a few more scenes with her that are a little bit longer and more telling later. But this is the first time that we see her. And she just looks devastated. It is so heartbreaking.
Yeah. All right. In the next scene, we have Corlys. He's walking through his harbor and he's been assessing the repair status for his main ship as he speaks to a new character. This new character is Alan of Hull, and really that's all the information that we get about him. Alan tells him that his ship is still in the repair process. However, they have sent 7 more ships to fortify the stepstones. Alan then hands Corlys a sword that was commissioned for Lucerys, and that was just a really
was sad.
touching moment. Yeah, and sad because you're just reminded of Lucerys' death. As Corlys takes the sword, Alan turns to walk away, and Corlys thanks Alan for saving him back when he was out in the Stepstones. And Alan simply says, "It was only my duty." And then Corlys says, "I am indebted to you, Alan." The general sense that I got from the scene is that we're going to see Alan again, that there's some kind of significance to Alan other than just that he repairs the ships and oversees the maintenance of them. But I am curious to see who Alan is and what his role will be in this season.
Yeah. I literally wrote, who the fuck is Alan and why is he important? So honestly, I took this scene as just a way to reintroduce us back to Corlys, see what he's doing, and obviously introduce us to Alan. I feel that you're absolutely right that he is going to come up again. I also thought this scene was notable because it did prompt a conversation with my husband. I said, if Lucerys is dead, who's the heir of Driftmark now? So I did do a little Googling. My understanding, and again, forgive me if I'm wrong, is that it passes to Joffrey because Joffrey is the next son, quote unquote, of Laenor and Rhaenyra. So Jacaerys is still the heir to the Iron Throne. Joffrey is now the heir to Driftmark. But then it also prompted a thought, which hopefully we won't ever have to have this conversation. But if Joffrey dies, who does Driftmark go to? And or if Jacaerys dies, who does Driftmark go to? Because if Jacaerys dies, Joffrey will now be heir to the Iron Throne because he's the next in line for Rhaenyra's. And of course, if Joffrey dies, then who's the heir to Driftmark? Because that is the last of Laenor and Rhaenyra's children. Aegon and Viserys are Daemon and Rhaenyra's, so no claim to Driftmark. So presumably after that, it goes to a distant cousin relative. So I did wonder if that's going to come into play at some point. Maybe not this season, in future seasons, but it did prompt that conversation just because when Corlys takes that dagger, he's like, oh, it was meant for Lucerys. I'm like, oh shit, who's the heir to Driftmark now?
That's true. The only thing I could think of is if maybe somebody related to Bela and Rhaena, like if they said go that route and have one of their kids potentially become the heir.
It gets dicey because in that scenario, normally people would probably petition the crown, just as they did in Vaemond's episode in season 1. However, there's a king and a queen. So who do you petition for that, right? So it gets pretty dicey pretty quickly. So hopefully we won't have to be confused by that in the near future. But it is just something that is interesting to think about.
That seems like a season 3 problem, not a season 1.
Exactly. So I will push it from your mind. I will not mention it again.
Yeah. So that was a very short scene with Corlys. And next we were back in King's Landing. And first off, it is totally green now, which is crazy because the Targaryen colors are red and black. Aegon is a Targaryen. And yet the Hightowers have completely overtaken this with their own family colors. I think by the end of the first season, it felt very religious. And we didn't really quite yet see a full instigation of green color and changing all of the royal colors. But I think by this first episode, it is very staunchly totally green. I thought that was interesting to note.
I will say, I don't know. I'd have to research it. I'm not sure if that's canon or if that's an aesthetic choice made by the producers of the show just to really play into this team green, team black. So absolutely very interesting to know and clearly delineates the lines between team green and team black. But I'm not sure. I didn't take it as a representation of the Hightowers taking over, more as just a way to
transition of power.
Yeah, because if you'll notice in all of Aegon's clothing, although it's green, there's still dragons embroidered. So he's definitely still leaning into the I'm the blood of the dragon vibe.
Yeah. I just know that the Hightowers green is their color. It felt to me distinctly Hightower.
Yes. Yeah.
In that sense. So
how can it not?
Yeah. So then we cut to the King's Guard and they're on a wall outpost. They've got their scorpions raised and ready as a dragon approaches. And you can tell that everyone is very on alert. Everyone's antsy about war to come. But of course, they see that it's Aemond returning on Vhagar, and they tell the Scorpions to stand down.
So at first when you see this scene, you're like, why is this important? Who cares if Vhagar is returning? But I actually feel this is important because Scorpions come up twice in this episode, later in the audience with the small folk. But I feel like this is important because it shows us that Team Green has this weapon in their arsenal, and this is the best defense that is known against dragons other than other dragons. And so I have a feeling that they want us to see that now because that's going to come into play in a bigger way later, maybe in a siege to King's Landing. I don't know, it feels like some shit Daemon would do where he just rolls off on his own and they use that against him. So I felt like that was very intentional that they wanted us to see this weapon in particular.
That's a fair point. Moving on, Helaena is now in the official apartments for the queen, and she's embroidering. Aegon walks in and asks where Jaehaerys is because he wants to bring him to the small council meeting. And Helena's like, he's not here. And Helaena says, what if he does not want to be king? Which I thought was interesting because Helaena also goes on to say that he's in the library and that it's important that he's not interrupted from his studies. And those combinations of things combined with the ending made me a little suspicious that maybe Helaena is trying to protect Jaehaerys from Aegon in a way. I just kind of felt like she didn't really want Jaehaerys following Aegon's influence, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Example. She didn't want him following Aegon's example.
Yes, that's a much better term, but that's kind of the impression that I was getting. So after Helaena tells Aegon that Jaehaerys is in the library and Aegon starts to walk that way out of the room, she says, I'm afraid. And Aegon's like, don't be. They'd be fools to come with Vhagar protecting the city. He thinks she's talking about just the impending war and everything. And she says, not the dragons, the rats.
And you're like, of course,
you're like, prophecy alert, like vision alert.
Yes. Well, season 1 me would be like, oh, what dumb shit is she talking about again? But after watching season 2, Addison knows that whatever Helaena says, you better fucking listen, okay?
Yes, you better listen to her. And of course, Aegon is still not listening. And he's like, the queen is enduring mystery, is she not? And then just walks out, which I think was intended as a little bit of comedic relief. Because everybody else is kind of just like, okay, Helaena, they don't know what's up with her. They don't understand that she sees visions and everything.
I think they would have figured that shit out by now. I mean, this is her third one that's been straight on the mark and no one's had this realization.
Pieced it together. Nobody.
Yeah. So I have to ask, when she said that, obviously you and I were both on high alert. We were like, ooh, what does this mean? What is she talking about? Did you have a guess about what you thought it would be about? Or were you just like, I'm just going to remember this for later?
I'm just going to remember it because I had no idea. I was like taking it literally. Is there going to be some kind of infestation of rats? That's really gross. Or actually, I did have a thought. I was like, maybe they meant a rat as in somebody, like a spy, like somebody was going to rat something out about somebody that was going to be really important later.
Like Laris maybe or something.
Yeah, or just one of the spies in the Red Keep. But aside from that, I had no idea what she was referring to. But I did know I need to be on rat watch. Okay.
Rat watch? Yeah, I felt very similarly. I had no idea. I mean, really, I just mentally prepared to file that away for future episodes. Because as you said earlier, usually there's a time gap between when she makes a prophecy and the event transpires. But nope, just like 2 days later.
Straight to it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the final event of this sequence of scenes is Alicent and Criston Cole.
And they're getting it on. They're getting it on.
Yeah. Well, I literally wrote, cute. I've been a nasty girl, nasty.
You know what? Everyone's going to hate on Alicent for it. And I only will a little bit just because I hate Criston Cole. But you know what? Good for her. Good for her. Because I do feel like her and Viserys loved each other. Okay. But the very brief impression we get of their intimacy is that it was not very fulfilling for Alicent. And so why shouldn't she get to have a little fun? Why should go for it, girl?
I agree. I did note that. I was like, I was shook to see this because I was literally so shocked by this event.
Yes.
But I did say that it was a little hypocritical because both of them were giving Rhaenyra so much shit and they were talking so much shit. And Criston was like up in arms and how she's a horrible C word, blah, blah, blah. But then he turns around and what is he doing? But like you said, on the other hand, I was also like, okay, get it, girl. Like,
I know, right? So, fun fact about this scene, because Aegon has ascended the throne, that makes Helaena the queen. So Alicent is no longer reigning queen. She's, I think, what they call a dowager queen, previous queen, mother of the king. And so Helaena has Alicent's old apartments, and Alicent has been moved to Rhaenyra's apartments. And I thought it was so funny. And there's just this weird symmetry that Rhaenyra banged Cole in that room, and now Alicent is banging Cole in that room. And I was just like, that's kind of weird. It's kind of funny. It's kind of weird. I don't know. But I thought that was interesting to know. And then I love at the end of the scene where she says, we cannot again. And he's like, yes, your grace. And I literally said, until next time, baby. And in the same episode, because I feel like she says that every goddamn time. She's like, okay, this is the last time I swear. And you're like, yeah, I bet it is.
Yeah.
I bet Cole's like, yes, ma'am, of course, absolutely. I'll see you in a few hours.
Yeah, basically. I knew she was full of shit as soon as she's like, this is not happening again. So
I'm like, oh, okay. So I have to ask, were you surprised then by this development in their relationship?
Yes. Yeah.
You were? Okay.
Yeah, I just didn't anticipate that because Alicent is so duty-oriented. And I think we start to see her transition out of that in the scene. We were having a conversation earlier, and I'm going off on a small tangent, but I think in this season, we already see more complexity in the characters. We see different facets of them and new developments for how they behave, how they act and everything. But I think on a grander scheme for the season itself, I have a feeling we're going to see more gray. We're going to see both sides engaging in more acts that we no longer can justify and defend them for. So,
right. Yeah, honestly, I was not totally shocked by that. I felt like that was actually foreshadowed in episode 9 when she implores Criston to go and get Aegon. And she says, everything you feel for me, ... as your queen. And if you'll recall in that recap of that episode, we did talk about, I was like,
yeah.
What do you mean everything you feel for me? So I was not totally surprised. And honestly, I'm not that sad about it. Again, good for her. I hate Criston Cole still. I don't want anything good to happen for him. But I don't hate Alicent. I like Alicent. So we'll see how it goes. I feel like it's going to end in ruin for both of them, honestly.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways, the last very brief scene before we cut to the small council meeting, which was a pretty important scene, we see a man. This turns out to be Cheese, and he's carrying a bunch of rat traps and stuff. And this happens frequently throughout this episode. So I feel like that was their way of breadcrumbing us to say this man's going to be involved because he keeps appearing in the background of a lot of scenes. So
yeah,
I'll point them out as we get to them. But I was like, rat watch.
Yep, I noticed that too. I was like, oh, nice little foreshadowing there, which, of course, the first time you're watching it, you have no idea. So you just think it's just, oh, they're just showing us a different side of the Red Keep. Surprise.
Surprise indeed.
The next scene we jump to is the small council scene with Team Green. So everyone comes in. They have their little stone balls, which, by the way, I finally looked that up because I was like, what the fuck are those for? Because obviously they played a pretty critical role in the death of Lord Beesbury, and they're in basically all the small council scenes. So all it is it's a physical representation of when someone is in the council meeting. It's like checking into a meeting, basically. It's like a little sign-in sheet. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a big basin in the middle of the table that holds all the stone balls. Each member has a ball assigned to them. Then once the member comes into the council, they take their ball and they put it in that circular dish. And so it's a physical representation of when members are in and out of the council, because there's only 7 members of the council at any given point. And so actually, when I was reading about it, and I never caught this in season 1, so I guess it's a little late for that now, but in season 1, Daemon's ball is always left standing. It's a physical representation of how he's not involved in the conversation. He's not involved in the small council because his is always standing alone in that dish in the middle. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wish I would have picked up on that symbolism in the first season because I definitely didn't. But that is what they're for. They're not for anything else, or not really.
They're not for vote counting.
No, that honestly, that was a good guess. I was like, oh, okay, that makes total sense to me. It's just a creative, symbolic prop that they use in the show. But anyway, they all go to the small council room and they're just all having a conversation about the state of the realm. They're talking about which houses have declared, which houses have not. They're waiting to hear back. And notably, they do discuss the blockade and how that's going to continue to put worsening pressure on King's Landing. And we've already started to see that a little bit in the audience with the small folk. And so all of those things are discussed and about what to do. However, while those things are being discussed, Aegon is looking at little Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys is terrorizing Thailand. And this is probably one of my favorite scenes of the entire episode. So he keeps taking his stone ball. And it's so funny because at first Thailand is like, thank you, Your Grace. You know, he's trying to play nice.
Yeah.
But you can tell Thailand does not like kids. He's not a kid person. So he's like, okay, can you go over there and leave me alone?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so in the middle of the conversation, they literally start fighting over it. Like Talon's like, give it back. Yeah. And the look on Aegon's face in this scene is so funny. And he says, is the heir to the throne bothering you, Sir Thailand? And Talon's like, no, absolutely not. And so then Aegon does his bullshit where he's like, I think he wants a ride. And Talon's like, huh? And I love when he goes, Jaehaerys, would you like the master of coin to be your noble steed? And of course, Jaehaerys is like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's nice to see Aegon be anything but a womanizing drunk.
I had that note where I was like, I feel like this is a really interesting development in Aegon's character because previously we've only ever seen him as the son who's just doing all of these crazy, heinous acts and shit.
Yes.
Being a total
piece of shit
disgrace. But I actually thought it was really funny. And you can tell that Aegon just really loves Jaehaerys. He may not be encouraging the best behavior out of him,
right?
But he really loves him and he wants him to be there. And he's just so happy when he's around Jaehaerys.
Yes. Well, and I took that as really more a symbolic representation of Aegon trying to recreate the childhood that he never had, right?
Yes.
We talked about this in the first season. I don't think Aegon ever cared about being heir to the Iron Throne. I think he cared that Rhaenyra got all the attention from Viserys because she was the heir. So it wasn't about the Iron Throne, what it represents, but the love, respect, the time that Rhaenyra got with Viserys. And I think that's really reflected here in this scene is that this is what he wishes his father would have done, is made him more a part of his life. And honestly, I don't blame Aegon. We talked about this, I think, in our last episode. You never see Viserys with any of the children, not Aemond, not Helaena. You see him with Rhaenyra, and that's it, basically. Yeah. And I think that's very telling that Viserys was just kind of like, okay, got a male heir. I'm just going to check the box and keep moving. And so I think that his interaction with Jaehaerys is very representative of that. As much as I would have liked to see Sir Thailand give Jaehaerys a pony ride, unfortunately, Alicent interrupts and puts a stop to that. And she's like, you know, there's a war going on. Maybe we should focus on that. And Aegon is very dismissive of that. But the important part of the discussion is the Riverlands and Harrenhal. And this is a critical foothold. Daemon mentions this a lot in his scenes as well. And so really, I think it's a race to Harrenhal. And Aegon's solution is just like, well, they'll support us or they'll meet Vhagar and Sunfire together. Which I just love that he's like, I'll defeat my dragon power.
Flippant. He doesn't really take the council meeting so seriously because, like you said, he's like, oh, we have dragons. We'll just flame them if they don't bend the knee.
I know. I'm like, I mean, on the one hand, he's not wrong. But on the other, I'm like, maybe not the best way to garner support, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
But this is when a popular theme of this episode is introduced. And I can't remember if it's Alicent or Otto. I think it's Otto. But basically the sentiment is that we must avoid using dragons at all costs. and we need to favor patience and restraint. We need to play the board in front of us, and that means not using our dragons to kill, flame, force support, because that's not going to be received well. And once you let the dragons out of the bag, you can't reel them back in. No cats here, just dragons.
Yes. So Aegon, in addition to just suggesting they flame anybody who doesn't bend the knee, he also brings up the fact that they should have just killed Rhaenyra. That's another part of their discussion. And that becomes a significant point of conflict between Alicent and Otto later on. So I want to note that because Alicent has very staunchly not supported the idea of killing Rhaenyra. She does not want Rhaenyra and her family to be slayed. But everybody else is pretty much like, well, we should have done it because it would have prevented this conflict. And so then later on, when Otto and Alicent were having their conversation, I was very confused because this whole time I thought they were on the same page. I was like, oh yeah, they're agreeing about needing to be patient and thoughtful about their next actions and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's been very evident from the beginning that is the biggest divide between Otto and Alicent is how they handle Rhaenyra and her family. And Alicent has been a staunch supporter of showing restraint, and ultimately she just wants them to bend the knee and then live their life in peace. And Otto, I think, understands that that's just not possible, and leaving them alive creates instability in the realm. But I just think Alicent hasn't come to that realization yet.
Yes.
So next we have Alicent, and she has left the small council and she runs into Larys in the hallway. And I just have to say at the top of this scene, every single fucking thing that comes out of Larys's mouth is so menacing. It doesn't matter what he's saying. There's always this undercurrent of implied threat in all of his dialogue, which is just really interesting to watch and also just acted and portrayed really, really well by the actor. It's a very brief conversation, but he says that he has interviewed all of her remaining staff and that he has rooted out all of the spiders still in the web of spies. And then he has also chosen her new staff personally. Alicent asked what of the staff that were spying, and he says, they no longer breathe our air. Which I was like, whoa, okay, that's an interesting way to say you murdered them. The only thing I really want to point out here is when he says, I chose your new staff personally, I literally wrote, oh, gee, I wonder if that's going to become a problem in the near future, right? And I think this is evidence in the very next scene. You see Alicent in the tub and all the maids are there and they're fussing over her and she just sends them all away. She's like, leave, just leave. And I had to ask myself, I'm like, what the fuck was that scene for? And it's because she doesn't trust her servants. I think she doesn't, because she doesn't trust them because she's writing right off that conversation with Larys. And so now she knows she's surrounded by people handpicked by Larys. She's smart. She has to know that they're in Larys's pocket. They're absolutely going to report everything to Larys.
Okay, that's a good point. I did note that I was like, oh, this is very interesting that Larys, the same person that had told Alicent they need to get rid of the former spies because they all work for Otto and that it's a problem, has now turned around, hired his own spies into a still existing network because it's immensely useful to have such a thing in your possession. But I did have a note. Do you think his spies already have informed him about Alicent and Cole? And that's why he said at the very beginning of their conversation, I meant to meet with you earlier, but you were indisposed.
I did wonder that because the way he says that is very menacing and knowing. And it's the inflection in which he delivers that word. And the word indisposed is so specific there. Like he could have said, and you were not available, you were busy, but you were indisposed. And so honestly, maybe it's not even the new ladies' maids he hired that told him. Maybe he just sussed it out because, he's very observant anyway. So if he doesn't have confirmation, I would guess that he suspects that something is going on between them.
Yeah, I wonder how that's going to play out. Because I did wonder if Larys, well, I don't know why I say that. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that Larys has some kind of weird sexual attraction to Alicent, right? Or is it purely just feet? Is it really just a feet thing in general, or is it specific to Alicent's feet?
Actually, it's funny that you asked that because I had a conversation with my husband about that. And I asked him, I said, does Larys love Alicent? Is that part of his motivations? And he said, honestly, I don't really know how to say this in a non-graphic way. This is kind of heavy, but in instances of sexual assault and rape, a lot of times rapists, it's not about the sexual gratification, it's about the power dynamics. And I feel that Larys's whole sexual thing is very evocative of a rapist psychologically, right? It's not about love for Alicent. I think that he is excited by the power dynamic between the two of them and asserting his dominance and will and power and control over her. Exactly. And so, I mean, I'm sure he does like Alicent. I'm sure he thinks she's attractive and has a fixation on her in particular. But I think for him, it's much more of a psychological gratification that he gets from their interactions. And that's why I think he continues behaving in the way that he does.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because it just feels really weird. I was a little worried that perhaps Larys is going to do something to Cole later.
I don't think he would off Cole because it's too useful for Cole to remain alive and for him to have the knowledge that he does of their romantic entanglement. He can use that as leverage to manipulate Alicent.
That's a fair point. You're right. Okay. That makes sense.
But that pretty much wraps up that scene. So, the next scene is so devastating. It's so devastating. Rhaenyra is at the beach. Well, she's not at the beach. That makes it sound like she's on vacation. That's not what I meant. Rhaenyra is with her dragon, Syrax, and she is really looking for closure of Lucerys' death. She wants evidence of that so that she can begin the grieving process. And she sees a beach and she sees a bunch of people and they're yelling, oh, it's a dragon's wing. And so I think she has this realization that, oh, has to be Aerax. And so she flies in on her dragon, which that was also, I'm sorry, I just love the dragons. It's so cool to watch them fly and just like land and then everyone goes running. And I just love all the shit with the dragons. But she hops off her dragon and she goes and she sees that it's one of Aerax's wings, and wrapped up in the net and the wing is cloth from Lucerys' clothing. And you just see her just sob hysterically. And I think just seeing the physical remnants of Aerax and Lucerys' clothing gives her the confirmation she needs to know that he really is gone. And this is, I think, paralleled with Rhaenys' conversation that she had with Daemon earlier. She needed to see Laena's physical remains to really accept that she was gone. Because I imagine that would be very difficult if you're just told your child is dead and you're like, no, I need to see it. I don't believe you. I won't believe you. So this is the beginning of her grieving process. And it is just heartbreaking. It
was really sad. It was so sad
it really
to watch.
Was. Yeah, it was. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of that sequence. It's very brief, but very moving and very powerful. And Emma Darcy does an excellent, excellent job in all of her scenes, but in particular this one.
Yeah, she doesn't need to say anything, and you just know. You just know exactly how she feels.
Exactly.
So in the next scene, Aegon is hearing court petitions. And to preface this entire scene almost made me kind of like Aegon in a way.
I did.
It's such a huge change.
Yes, I loved Aegon. Yes.
In this one, I really did. Funny. I mean, again, I think it plays into this idea that he just wants to be liked and loved by people. But it is such a huge change from how he was in season 1. It doesn't excuse his behavior in season 1, but it does help you see a different side of him that starts to shift your opinion of him, right? So first of all, I thought the speech, his little posse of people that follows behind him, introduces him as Aegon the Magnanimous. And I just thought that was such a ridiculous entry speech. I was like, no one's going to take you seriously when someone introduces you.
Yes. Okay. Aegon says the Magnanimous and the guy shrugs because who the fuck knows what that means? So I actually looked it up just in case anyone wants to know. It means generous or forgiving, especially toward a rival or less powerful person. I thought this was hysterical because I think the scene is mostly meant to be funny because it's a big word and nobody knows what it means. But I also think that it's foreshadowing because I do not think that Aegon will be very magnanimous to Rhaenyra and Team Black when he finds out about what happened to Jaehaerys.
Oh, absolutely not. He's going to go batshit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so I thought that was interesting that they chose that particular word with that meaning, knowing what's about to happen in about 6 scenes.
Well, the literal interpretation of that goes along with this whole scene, though, because, first off, he has the man that raises sheep. He comes in, he's asking about needing more sheep, and Aegon is like, we'll replace your sheep. Yeah, no problem. And then Otto comes in and he's like, no, we need those sheep for the dragons. There was a tithe,
Yeah.
And Aegon is kind of frustrated by that, right? But he's like, okay, fine. Well, actually, in the conversation, he was like, perhaps we can just return his sheep. Just that one guy's sheep.
I know. He's so sweet because he's like, well, he did come all this way. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's so nice.
It is really nice. And I was like, oh. But again, you also see that he's not really thinking long term. He's in a very people pleasing mode where he's like, oh, yeah, whatever you want, we'll give it to you because I'm magnanimous. I'm generous. I am a king that you love, right? So Otto is advising Aegon about the sheep situation. You also briefly see Larys again in the background overseeing everything that's happening, right?
I missed that.
Yes. Ooh. Larys is there again. Larys is always in the background creeping. He's just always there. He knows. Okay. And then the next person that comes up is Hugh the blacksmith. And he asks them to get paid before starting work for more weapon construction. And Aegon wants to give him the money. And he states that their victory depends on the efforts of the small folk. And I thought it was interesting that Otto actually did not advise it. He makes a move like he's about to step in and be like, no, Aegon, we can't do that. But then he steps out of the way. And I don't quite know what that was about.
I took it because you see him, he's walking up the stairs to tell Aegon, you can't give them the money now. But then it's when Aegon starts talking about the small folk and he says, our victory depends on the effort of the small folk. Earlier in this scene, when Otto is talking to Aegon, he says, when the king speaks, all hear. He recognizes that anything that Aegon says in this room is going to be repeated. And so that phrasing specifically is probably going to be repeated. And so it would be a really bad look for Aegon to utter that phrase and then promptly not support the people making the weapons for the war. And so I think he just has to let Aegon have this little ruling victory and just be like, it would look really bad for me to get involved with this, is how I took it.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Also, notably, in the background, we see Cheese walking. They cut to a quick scene of Cheese just walking in the background with his rat traps.
Really? Again? I missed that. Oh,
there's so many people just in the background, lurking, doing schemes and everything. That rounds out Aegon's court petition scene. And as he's exiting the throne room, Larys comes up to meet Aegon. And he essentially baits him with the idea that Otto controlled Viserys, as he seems to be trying to do to Aegon, and that he suspects Aegon wants to be viewed differently. Larys says, Otto was your father's hand, your grace. And it's heavily implied that he is telling Aegon, just get rid of Otto. So Larys is making moves. Actually, I wonder if he's going to try to become hand to Aegon.
Okay, that's exactly what I was going to ask you is, do you think that he's angling for himself to be the hand?
Could be. I could see a world where he does that. But also, would that put Larys too much in the forefront? Where he can't really do his shadowy lurking schemes as well, maybe?
True.
I don't know. I could see him becoming the hand for sure.
Oh, yeah. I think it'd go either way.
Yeah. We'll see, I guess. So Aegon doesn't really say much to that. He just gives him a look of, okay, I'll think about it. And then they depart. And we cut back to Alicent and Otto. And this is where I think that the scene really shows that there is still conflict between Alicent and Otto. You kind of got the impression that they were somewhat on the same page when they were in the small council meeting, but behind closed doors, they still argue. She asks Otto if they are really on the same page. And then she goes on to say that ultimately she just wants victory. And Otto says to her, how would you describe victory? And Alicent says, Rhaenyra bending the knee and Aegon sitting on the throne in peace. And then Otto says, if that's how you describe it, then we are aligned. Which I wasn't quite sure if he was being sincere about that. But I guess at this point, it seems that he is.
I mean, yes and no. I think in an ideal world, that would be great. I don't think that Otto is hell-bent on murdering Rhaenyra and her family because he's bloodthirsty, I think that would be great if that could happen. But he also has distance from the situation and can see that's not ever going to be possible for many, many reasons. And so I think he is genuine, but in a way he also is not, because he knows that's literally not possible.
Yeah, it seemed like he was kind of saying that just for the sake of quelling the emotions of the conversation so that they can actually sit down and hash it out. But because then she goes on to say, be my ally. And he says, I am your ally. And Alicent then goes on to continue voicing her frustration with Otto's undermining of her. And Otto argues that there's been a lot of things that have not gone to plan since Viserys died. Aemond was not supposed to kill Viserys. That threw a huge wrench in their plans. And Alicent expresses that her sons really look up to Otto. And Alicent also mentions that she still has a degree of control over Aegon, at least in a private sense. But she's like, if you continue to undermine my voice, both of those boys will grow deaf to it, meaning they'll just start to ignore her entirely. The rest of the conversation kind of plays out. And her last line is, we only need to mind Aegon until the novelty of rule is spent. Once he tires of it, you and I can steer our cause to victory. There's a couple things happening, right? So on one hand, Alicent and Otto are having a little tiff, but ultimately they are aligned. I think Alicent still respects her father. She was the first person that Otto pushed into all of this. And then she had her sons. Her sons now, one of them sits the Iron Throne. The other one, as much as she didn't want him to be so involved, it feels like he is still very much involved. And more importantly, Aegon wants Aemond there. You see that conflict playing out between Alicent and her sons now, because even when Aemond walked into that small council meeting, Alicent was like, what are you doing here? You don't have a seat here. And it seemed very obvious that she did not want Aemond present, because I think she realizes Aemond has a strong influence over Aegon and would be totally fine with Aegon flaming people and whatnot. And so,
yeah, I think she knows that them together unchaperoned is a bad fucking idea.
It's a lethal combination.
Yes,
literally.
Between Sunfire and Vhagar, shit ain't gonna be good.
Right. I feel like this is going to become a point of contention for Team Green itself. Like, you're going to see the split and differing opinions about what course of action to take. And by the end of their conversation, Otto reminds Alicent that they are on an unstoppable path to violence. And Alicent says, I know it, but it must not be one time. So to your point that you mentioned earlier, she is kind of accepting that, okay, there's going to be bloodshed, but I don't want anything to happen unintentionally. She wants to make sure that it's as controlled as possible. All right. So we next are introduced to Mysaria again. Aemond and his men have found Mysaria. They found her stowed away. And once they grab her, Daemon wants to know how long she's been spying for Hightower. And Mysaria basically says, as long as she was getting paid for that information. She's like, it was purely transactional. There's no allegiance to them by any means. And of course, Daemon is still very angry. He blames her for her role in Aegon usurping Rhaenyra. And he literally says to her, you put Aegon on the throne. And Mysaria counters this by saying, that was Hightower's conspiracy. I simply sped up the business. My business was purely transactional. Aegon was going to eventually go back anyway. Basically, she's like, I was just trying to get money, right? I wasn't necessarily doing anything. And at the end, she says, I possess nothing of value to you, Daemon, because Daemon is very pissed at her. And I wasn't sure if Mysaria is still kind of playing Daemon. I kind of get the sense that she is, because obviously she doesn't want to be killed, but her info at the end of the day is her bargaining chip. Her network of spies is the only reason that anybody bothers to keep her alive. But Daemon storms out and he demands to Sir Eric that she be moved to the cells, treated as a traitor to the crown. Eric actually defends Mysaria, stating that she told the truth, and then Daemon berates him for not killing Aegon when he had the chance. Again, Daemon blames everybody else for why Aegon is on the throne. And Eric says him and his brother were in the Kingsguard since they were 8 and 10, and that their instructions were to defend the whole family. And he says, what were we to do when the family turned on one another?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is an interesting line. And it's a fair point. It's like, what?
Yes.
Your duty is to the family as a whole. So,
well, I think with the way the show is marketed, with the Team Black versus Team Green, all must choose and take a side, you forget that they're all a fucking family. They're all related, right?
Yeah.
Rhaenyra is literally brother and sister with Aegon and Aemond, half brother and sister. But still, I think you forget that. This is just one big family and shit got crazy.
Yeah.
Shit got crazy really fast. And so I think it's important that Eric points that out to us as viewers because it reminds us of important context for all the interactions that they have and the decisions that they make. Right? Alicent and Rhaenyra are childhood best friends. They've literally been friends since they were children, right? Can you imagine contemplating orchestrating the murder of your childhood best friend? I fucking can't. You know, it's awful when you think about it.
Yes, totally. Of course, Daemon is clearly still very pissed and he just walks off. But as he's walking off, they see a dragon flying back. And that leads us into our next scene. We see that the dragon flying back is Rhaenyra, and we are now in the painted table room. She just walks in. She looks absolutely pissed, heartbroken, pure look of vengeance on her face. And of course, as she's walking around, everybody at the council starts giving her updates about where they stand. And all she simply says is, I want Aemond Targaryen. And then she walks off.
She's out of there. It's her only line the entire episode. Yep.
4 words. I did feel this is your first foreshadowing of the muddying of the waters between the causes and morals of Team Black as well. Because I think it's very easy to hate Team Green, and I still don't like Team Green. But I think we're going to see Team Black overstep the line to a point where you're like, oh, wait, that was crossing it to some extent too. So we'll see.
So as Rhaenyra leaves the painted table room, you see Daemon get a look on his face and you're like, oh, time for Shadow Daddy Daemon to appear and he's going to take some revenge on behalf of Rhaenyra. So there's a very brief scene of him where he goes to see Massaria and he's investigating what ties she still has to King's Landing and what she actually still knows. And it's implied that she still knows just enough to help Daemon out with his plan for revenge. So the conversation is off screen and what is exchanged, but that's the implication that we get. Next, we cut to Jacaerys' return from Winterfell, and he comes in, and it's just the whole scene, the way it's directed, it's just so heartbreaking. There's something about him that I've always said that he is so dishonorable and good. And so he sees Rhaenyra and he starts with your grace, addressing her as queen. And he starts to give her a report of everything that occurred while he was on his mission to rally support. And he's talking and his voice starts breaking. And then obviously Rhaenyra, she starts to cry. He starts to cry. They embrace. And it is just, oh my gosh, it's
it was really
sad.
I know.
But it was acted very well. It was directed very well. And again, I think the director of this episode did a really good job of not using words to convey emotions, but really just actions and the chemistry between characters. And so I think that's really highlighted in this scene. And I really, really enjoyed that. I mean, I didn't enjoy it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It was really Rhaenyra being a mother first. It was a very humanizing moment, I think, for them.
I agree. So promptly after that, there is a beautiful set of scenes that have beautiful parallels. So you see Alicent go into the sept and she begins lighting candles in remembrance and honor of the dead. And while they also simultaneously have Lucerys' funeral. And of course, he's a Targaryen, he's a dragon. So it's a funeral by fire. And they cut back and forth between these two scenes. So I did want to note the very first candle that Alicent lights, she says Allery Florent. And I was like, who the fuck is that? Looked it up. It's her mother, which I guess I kind of assumed, but just actual confirmation. She's referring to her mother. She lights a candle for Viserys. Simultaneously, you're also seeing Jace throw something into the fire, Rhaenyra throw something into the fire, and I thought it was so, so sad when Joffrey throws his little toy horse into the fire too. I know. And you see Jacaerys holding Joffrey. And it's just, that is one thing I've always loved about Rhaenyra's children is that they are all so brotherly and they really take care of each other. That was the part that made me tear up the most, actually. I know. And then as Rhaenyra is throwing in her piece into the fire, you see Alicent and she lights a candle for Lucerys Velaryon. And I think that's just important because, again, it highlights this idea that Alicent really does hold a lot of love and reverence and respect for Rhaenyra and her family. And that I think she is also grieving the loss of Lucerys. Obviously not in the same way that Rhaenyra and her family are, but that is technically her grandchild that was killed. Is that right?
No.
No? Because she's the stepmother of Rhaenyra. So that would be her step-grandchildren.
Yeah, I guess you're right, actually.
Yeah. It's weird, but whatever. You get the point, right? They're family, and it's sad.
Yeah.
But it's a really beautifully directed scene. So not a ton of analysis, but just important to note the visuals of it and the symbolic meaning of it. So after that, we see Shadow Daddy Daemon, and he's in his crime cloak, getting ready to do some crime. And he's on a rowboat. And so immediately you're like, what the fuck is he doing in a rowboat? And why is he wearing a crime cloak? Well, it's because he's going to King's Landing. So he makes his way through the city, comes to the gate, and we get introduced to the character of Blood. And such a stupid name. I hate saying it. It sounds weird. I don't know. But whatever. I'll just get over it. But he says something to the effect of, I heard you have no love for the High Towers. And he responds, fuck the High Towers. So pretty obvious that he has no love or allegiance to the High Towers. So he takes him to see Cheese, who we've seen, as Lorraine has pointed out so deftly, that he has been seen many, many times in the background of scenes in the castle. And he literally is a rat catcher. Like, that's his actual job. He catches rats in the castle. Daemon, Cheese, and Blood all have an exchange where basically they plot out a revenge scheme. He gives him a bunch of money and he says, I want a son for a son. And
actually, he doesn't say a son for a son in this conversation, which I think is important. He does not. I think it's implied. People think that he did, but when you actually watch the sequence of their conversation, he does not say a son for a son. He specifically says, you're to find and slay the Prince Aemond Targaryen. He has silver hair and one eye. He should be easy to find. And then he gives him half the money. And then she says, all right, but what if we can't find him? And Daemon simply gives him a look. He doesn't actually say anything back to that. And when I first watched that scene, I thought he was trying to imply to Cheese that if you don't catch someone, I'll kill you. But I think based off the rest of the context, when Cheese and Blood are talking, you piece together that I think Aemond had given them free reign, that he didn't really care as long as it was a son for a son situation. And that's why they're so fixated on getting a son, aka Jaehaerys.
That's interesting because I think it's very intentional that when he asked that question, the response is off screen. So I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on that. So that's interesting. Okay. So the other thing I thought was just interesting world building for this scene is there's a reference to Maegor's tunnels. And these are the tunnels under the Red Keep that a lot of people use. Obviously, Cheese uses them for his rat catching. And fun fact about Maegor, I think, was the third king. And he was the one who oversaw the finishing of the Red Keep. And after it was finished, he had all the builders killed so that no one would actually truly know the layout of the tunnels in the castle.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's fucked up.
Yeah. The Targaryens have been doing fucked up shit for a long time. Long fucking time. Well, as the saying goes, every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin, So that's pretty evocative in this scene. But I did just think that was a little interesting world building. But this conversation sets forth the final events of the episode, and we'll talk about that in about 2 minutes.
Yep. So in the next scene, we cut to Aemond, and he's speaking with Criston Cole. They're strategizing, thinking about where to attack, head to where they need to take over next. And through their discussion, Aemond realizes that Aegon is swayed by Alicent and Otto. And then he has another comment about Alicent as well. He says, and Alicent is simply angry. She blames me for starting this war after plotting with my father's council to usurp his throne. Her grace speaks with two tongues. And I was like, ooh, okay, Aemond, coming in hot.
Well, and it's just so funny because obviously he doesn't know that Cole and Alicent are banging. So you have that added element of Cole is trying to be neutral and not give it away. But I'm sure his instinct is to be defensive of Alicent.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. But I did feel he was pretty perceptive of Aemond. This comment from Aemond further confirms something that you as the viewer were starting to sense. So Cole's response to Aemond is, she has a gentle heart, and Rhaenyra is a cunning spider. Long ago, she drew Alicent into her web, intoxicating her. It is not your mother's fault. Aemond then says, she holds love for her enemy. That makes her a fool. In a weird way, I'm starting to like Aemond as well. Well, I guess I never hated Aemond, but there was a lot that I was like, side-eye.
I've always liked Aemond.
Yeah, he does give Daemon vibes. I guess I just wasn't quite sure how it was going to play out. Maybe I'll put him as like an unsure character. I wasn't really sure how to feel about him yet. But these comments were interesting. I feel like he's pretty perceptive. He's giving major Daemon vibes. So we'll see if he turns out to be in the same realm of morally gray as Daemon is, I guess.
I don't think anyone is as morally gray as Daemon.
That's probably true. Good point.
Yeah. I just like in this scene, it really highlights how intelligent Aemond is. Not just perceptive, but it's clear that he has a mind for strategy and a vision for how things are likely to play out. And I think that's really nice to see a character who's so young, but yet so intelligent and thoughtful about how things go. That doesn't mean necessarily he's always going to be right, but it's clear compared to all of the other children, Jace, well, used to be Luke, Aegon, etc., you really don't see a lot of them display that kind of thinking. I'm not saying they're not intelligent and don't have that capability, but I feel like that's highlighted in Aemond's character because he has that scene in the Small Council and then this scene with Cole, and it's clear that he has a vision for the realm. And I think that is also indicative of his character because remember, he wants to be king. And so I think a lot of his worldview is shaped by this single-minded focus of how can I shape the realm?
Yeah, I agree with that. As their conversation is continuing, Otto soon walks in and he sends Cole away because he wants to talk to Aemond individually. He starts to press concern over Aemond's planning without involving him and the council. Because Otto's obviously trying to keep an eye on Aemond, and he's like, what's going on here? Aemond says, I only wish to serve my king and my house. And then Otto says, you and Vhagar are the single greatest power in the realm. But there are many pieces at play here. I promise you will have all the vengeance you seek, but you must keep a grip on your impulses. We both know your brother cannot. Interesting because I think Aemond has always been the child that the rest of the family pushes into more responsibility. I feel like they kind of gave up on Aegon in a way, other than the fact that he was the firstborn and therefore he has a certain role to play, but they all depend on Aemond to steer them the right way. And I think that's why it's so important for Otto and Alicent to keep Aemond within their control too, because they know he influences Aegon and Aegon is a loose cannon. That's a better term for it. So yeah, that's really all I had to say for that scene. And then of course we get to the final part of this episode, which was by far the most thrilling, gruesome, horrifying, emotionally charged part of this entire episode, I think.
Oh, God. I have to say, this is the first time where I was like, I wish we weren't covering this on the podcast because I don't want to watch this again. It was very painful to watch twice.
Yeah. Ugh, all those noises.
Oh, my God. That was... Thank God they didn't show it, honestly. I have to them not to show the cutting, but for them to pick up the head and you see a glimpse of it. because that's so Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I couldn't have done it.
I wouldn't put it past them to do it in the next episode, though, as proof that like they did that. You know what I mean? Like they're going to bring the head to Daemon or something. That would be horrible. I don't want to think about that because that's awful.
I'm not even recovered from this episode, okay? I'm not. I need at least like 3 more business days.
But anyways, the rat catcher, the adventures of blood and cheese. So obviously we know that they have been employed to kill Aemond. To start off the scene, our dynamic duo is walking through the tunnels. They first hit a ladder point that takes them up to a formal part of the castle, because right now they're below in the sewers. So they climb up there. They enter, I don't know what you'd call it, but
a main thoroughfare of Maegor's tunnels.
Okay, yes, that. They hit that point. And this is when Blood starts yelling at Cheese. He's demanding that he get them upstairs. And Cheese is kind of like, whoa, I got us this far. I thought you were just going to do the rest. And he's like, hell no, that's not what this deal was about. You need to get me upstairs. And
I feel like he's just like, I'm just the cheese. You're the blood. Okay. You do the blood stuff. I do the cheese stuff. I'm like, dude, I don't know why, but that was kind of funny to me.
Honestly, it was such a rat move. And he is a rat catcher after all. So
I wonder how many times we're going to make rat puns.
Forever, I hope. But this scene also was particularly disturbing because after Blood yells at Cheese, he then kicks the dog.
That was so awful.
That was horrible. I mean, we knew they were bad people, but come on. As soon as you kick a dog, you're done.
Oh, yeah.
Forever. There's no redemption.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think honestly, even that little bit of distinction really shows you which one is more evil. Because it's one thing you took a job to go do some assassinating and kill Aemond. But I think Blood is the one who kind of instigates killing Jaehaerys in lieu of, right? And honestly, I feel like kicking a dog kind of is foreshadowing for that. You're not just a bad guy. You're a literal piece of shit. You kicked an animal. I don't know why, but that just really outraged me. I was like, but why? Why did you do that? That was so unnecessary.
Bottom of the barrel behavior. Okay.
Yes. You know what he is? He's no better than a sewer rat.
You're so right. He needs to get flushed.
Get flushed in the sewer with the rats.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. All right. So after this very horrible encounter, they proceed upstairs. And then this is where they happen upon the throne room. And Aegon is there with a bunch of his little posse people. And they're all drunk. They're laughing about how Aegon was called magnanimous, etc. And Cheese and Blood spend like a minute or so just watching, evaluating what they should do. And ultimately, they just decide, don't make eye contact, just keep walking.
Okay, wait. Did you notice in that throne room scene? So you have to listen for the dialogue, but it's Aegon and all his buddies, and they're drinking, and they're joking about his nickname, right? And so they're like, oh, magnanimous, ha, ha, ha. And someone says, Aegon the Strong. And he says, oh, my nephew has already taken that one. And they all start laughing. And I was like, gosh, that's a good one. I mean, like, it's kind of funny, but kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I am like, wait, did he just say Aegon the Strong? And so then I did a little rewind and I was like, oh my God. So that was just kind of a fun little catch in that scene.
That's so funny. I've been really enjoying reading all the comments about the strong jokes.
Oh my God. They're so funny. There's so much you can do really with them.
I know. Mm-hmm. But anyways, they continue on and they actually end up in the strategy room that Cole and Aemond were in previously. And at this point, no one is there. And you can tell that Cheese is becoming increasingly more anxious. He's like looking around. He's worried they're going to get found out. And then Blood tells him to set up a trap. He's like, you got to play the part, right? Otherwise, people are going to question why you're up here. Yeah. And as he leaves Cheese with that, Blood walks off to a room next door and he starts pretending to set up a trap as well. And this is when he runs into a maid, which I thought it was hilarious also that a lot of the comments on like Reddit and stuff were like, oh, the Frida Pinto.
Oh my God. Okay. I was not going to say anything because I was like, I'm not going to be that person. But that is exactly what I freaking thought. I literally wrote the maid with the very distinct eyebrows.
Yes. It was either that or Emma Stone, and I was a little bit like, ugh. That one.
Oh my God. Okay, we have a question though. Did you think that he was going to kill that maid when you first watched it?
Yes.
I did.
I thought he was trying to go kill her, which leads us to the next part. He's pretending, and as he turns and looks away, the maid makes her escape, and he's like, oh shit, she's going to go tell someone, right? So he's, I think, starts walking down the hallway trying to look for her, but he's interrupted by the muffled screams of somebody in another room. Blood goes to investigate, and this is where he finds Cheese at knife point with Helaena. So this was obviously the bulk of the anxiety. You're watching all of this happen, and you're progressively also getting more and more anxious because you're like, how is this going to play out? Who are they going to find? And we see that Helena's in the room with her children. Cheese has got her at the neck with a knife. I was like, oh, fuck. They're going to take the kids.
Oh, see, okay, I didn't think they were going to do anything with the kids. Honestly, I thought, specifically Cheese, but maybe both of them, I thought that they were going to sexually assault Helaena. That's where I thought it was going to go. I thought it was going to take a turn from like, oh, we can't find Aemond, well, since we're here. Or I thought maybe they might kill Helaena.
Kill Helaena? Okay. Mm-hmm. That was my follow-up thought, is like, oh, they're going to kill her. But in either case, any of those options would have been very horrible as well. But they're sitting there, Blood's looking at them like, what are you doing? And they kind of debate for a minute, and they're trying to figure out which one of the children is the son. And she threatens Helaena, and he's like, which one? Tell me which one. And this is when Helaena first offers her necklace. She's trying to distract them. She thinks that at this point, they're just thieves, I guess, that are looking to loot the castle and make off with some money, I think is why she offered the necklace.
I think her idea is, I think she knows that they're there to kill. I don't think necessarily who's targeted, but I think she knows that. I think the idea is whatever they've paid you, this necklace is of more value, so just take it and leave. I think it's the idea.
Right. In either case, she's trying to distract them. And Blood is like, that's not a son. And they keep pressuring her. And at this point, I wasn't sure if she was actually going to tell the truth. And I was shocked that she actually did. I mean, I guess when you reflect on it, it kind of makes sense. But still, I was like, whoa. She actually pointed at Jaehaerys. And I was wondering, what was your thought about why she did that? Why do you think that she did, in fact, point to Jaehaerys?
You have to remember that Helaena has these premonitions, right? And we're not privy to how detailed they are, how much context she has. I don't think it's as detailed as she knows the future step by step, because then she could engage and probably try to take preventative measures. However, I get the sense that her premonitions are a little more feeling based with like images. And so for some reason, I have it in my head that she knew it was inevitable, that there was nothing that she could do, and that not complying would be more likely to end up in the death of the other child and herself, or some combination thereof. And so I think it was just kind of like, I don't know what else to do. And so this is the only choice that I have. I just think she just was like, this is my best option and the best way for me to get out of this alive with at least one of my children.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. To continue on with the scene, Blood still thinks that she's lying, but Cheese is really looking at her, and Helena's looking back with him. And you kind of almost see this confirmation in her eyes, like the way that she looks at him. And she says she's telling the truth. And this is when they let her go. She scoops up her other child and hightails it out of there. And meanwhile, you just hear the most sickening noises in the background as they behead Jaehaerys.
I can hear it now. I know. I can too. The sounds. Jesus Christ. I know it's fiction, but still.
There's something squelching and just, okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, don't say squelching.
Okay. But Helena's stumbling off and she ends up finding herself at Allison's room. I don't know if that was intentional or that was just the closest room that she happened upon first, but she bursts in there and Allison and Cole are
Get
doing
it
the
on.
nasty. Yep.
Doing the
getting it on.
Allison's being a nasty girl.
She's being a nasty girl for sure. Oh my gosh. Which actually, if you think about it, was this like the second time of the day for them?
I think so, because just that morning she's like, we cannot again. He's like, yes, Your Grace. Like, okay, a gentle night, baby. Yeah.
We digress. Point being, they're shocked that Helaena stumbles in there, but Helaena does not seem to give any attention to this whatsoever. She is so shocked and traumatized by the events. She has her child, she sits down, and she simply says, they killed the boy. And this is the end of our episode.
Man, I feel like in a way they almost left that on a cliffhanger, right? Because I am just so, not excited sounds like the wrong word, but I'm so excited to see their reactions. Everyone's reactions to this news. Like, I don't think Rhaenyra's going to fucking take this well. I definitely don't think Aegon's going to take it well. Neither is Alicent, Otto. Like, it's just going to be absolute chaos. And I am really excited to see how the fallout of this plays out.
Yeah, what's the next move ultimately going to be? Oh, I have no idea, but I can tell you right now, an act of revenge will be taken for sure.
Oh, yeah. Has to be.
Well, everybody, that wraps up our analysis. And now we are going to move on to the fantasy court of law. So, do we have anything to add to our case?
I do. Okay, so we'll start with Team Green.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to note is that Aegon thus far is actually trying to be a good king. This is especially evident in his audience with the small folk. Otto even says, when the king speaks, everyone hears. And I think his interactions with them and the sentiment is that he's pretty good with the small folk. And I think that will get him far in way of support of people, specifically in King's Landing.
To add to that, I had read some comments about that point, and people had brought up the fact that a lot of Aegon's extra time prior to becoming king was hanging out in the city. I mean, granted, he was in the slums and all that stuff, but he was literally with the poor common folk.
That's true.
People were saying in the comments that they felt like he probably felt more of a connection to them than the royal family, because his own family and the rest of the royals pretty much ignored him and treated him like shit before he became king.
Yeah, you have to remember, in general, the royal family's exposure to the small folk is almost non-existent. In season 1, when Rhaenyra goes out of the castle, I think she's 14 or 15, and that's the first time I think she's basically, well, it's not the first time she's left the castle, but she's been to other places, but with the royal family, but like actually out around the people that she's supposed to reign over. I think that was her first time. I never thought about that, but you're right. That is a huge difference, because it seems like Aegon spent quite a bit of time with the small folk.
Right.
The second thing for Team Green is I feel that when people find out about Jaehaerys, it is going to turn them against Rhaenyra. It's not going to play out well politically for her. I feel like it goes against the rules of engagement and honor, and it may turn houses against her, because don't get me wrong, Lucerys' death, absolutely horrible. But there is this element of Aemond is 17 or 18, Lucerys was 14. They're young men in this universe, whereas Jaehaerys is a 4-year-old child who was beheaded in his cradle. You know what I'm saying? I think some people, of course, will defend Rhaenyra and say it was justified, a son for a son, right? But ultimately, I think that people are not going to have a stomach for it in the way that they would had they killed Aemond. And so I feel that is going to turn a lot of people against Team Black, because it is just so horrific.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I feel like maybe the people themselves, as far as the actual common folk go, I don't actually know if they really care that much. To them, this is just a feud about the houses. But between other royal houses and everything, they would definitely, I think, view that negatively.
Yeah, I was definitely referencing more houses that are undecided or have not declared. There's just something about the rules of engagement and honor. That's why Lucerys' death is so problematic, because he's there as a messenger, not a warrior. And even if you recall, Baratheon was like, he's here as an envoy. There will not be bloodshed.
Yeah.
There's certain rules of warfare that you're supposed to
Conduct.
follow and conduct.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's all I have for Team Green.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't really have much to add either.
Okay, cool. And then for Team Black, I think it's important to know when Jacaerys returns, he does confirm to Rhaenyra that Lady Jane Eyre at the Vale pledges her banner to Rhaenyra in exchange for a dragon to protect them. I'm assuming they're going to follow through on that. The Starks also pledged 2,000 graybeards, which is just a term for old men. I don't know why they call them graybeards, but okay. And that is important to know in terms of strength of their numbers. And then lastly, I thought this is probably the most important point that is going to make Team Black a little bit stronger, is that the blockade is continually being bolstered. And this is greatly going to help them weaken King's Landing and Team Green. This was discussed in the small council that they're worried about it. And then the small folk when they are petitioning Aegon, especially there's two of them. One is talking about how they rely on salts from the ships from Essos. Right. And they're already having issues with that. And the cost of iron is starting to go up. And so they're already feeling the economic effects of that. And even I think you can tell in that small council scene that Otto is very concerned about the blockade and how it can quickly go from bad to worse if they aren't able to get supplies in to King's Landing. That's all I had for Team Black.
All right. Perfect. And of course, last but not least, before we end this episode, we do have our favorite moments to share. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Oh, why don't you go first?
Okay. My first moment that I really liked was when Aegon is telling Tylan to give Jaehaerys a pony ride. He's trophy with him.
Iconic. Iconic. Who didn't fucking love that scene?
I actually almost thought that Tylan was going to do it, and then Alicent stopped them. I think he would have had Alicent not stop
them. The king commands it.
True. Yeah. And then my next favorite moment is again from Aegon. And when he's at the petitions with the small folk, and he says, perhaps we can just return his sheep, like just to the one guy.
He seems so genuine and sincere. I just want to give him a hug in that scene.
I know. Yeah, I would say that this episode was a big win for Aegon. I think it really turned perceptions of him.
I think so too.
Then my next one after that was when Rhaenyra comes back and she hugs Jace. And I thought it was just a really tender and very sweet moment. It was really sad, really devastating to watch, but also really sweet to see that they have such a close relationship.
Yeah, it was a very tender moment.
Yeah. And then my last one was when Aemond says her grace speaks with two tongues.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Because I just like that he called Alicent out for her hypocrisy.
Damn. Coming in hot at the end of the episode.
Yes. Hot takes only. What were your favorite moments?
Well, of course, we had some overlap here. Who did not love the Tylan pony ride small council scene? And same thing. I just loved Aegon. The whole scene with Aegon and petitioning the small folk and everything. It was just really entertaining. I also loved when, at the beginning of that scene, when King Aegon comes in and the announcer's like, King Aegon the Magnanimous. And Aegon goes, the Magnanimous?
Yeah.
And the guy next to him like shrugs. He's like, I don't fucking know. I just thought it was a funny running joke throughout the show because like, who the fuck knows what that means? And it just doesn't fit him at all, you know?
None of them knew what it meant and they're just throwing it around. So
yeah. And then my last favorite moment was in Daemon and Rhaenys' conversation. He says, fly with me, it is a command. And Rhaenys responds with, would that you were the king. And she just delivers it with a smirk. And it's just, I love her because she's the only one who she doesn't fuck with Daemon and his bullshit, right? And she knows just how to just gently just poke the bear because, I don't know, it just was the perfect thing to say to him. I thought it was really funny.
There was actually another funny comment. I'm finding out all my information from just reading Reddit comments and stuff. But people pointed out how Rhaenys, when she first got back, she's like, I must gorge. And so,
she said Meleys must gorge and rest, and so must I.
Yeah. And everybody is like, I'm going to say that every time now. Anytime I come back from anywhere, I must gorge and rest.
I must gorge and rest.
Oh, I don't know. This episode was fairly funny. There was a lot of sad and gruesome, horrific parts, but it was actually fairly funny. I found myself smiling and laughing at some of the parts, which I can't say I've really done for many of the episodes of House of the Dragon so far.
Yeah, I think that it speaks to the showrunners and that they did a good job of balancing the horror of blood and cheese and Lucerys's death with some lighthearted moments. They continually develop the characters and make them more dynamic, because in the first season I was like, fuck Aegon. And now we're one episode and I'm like, I kind of like Aegon. I'm kind of cool with him,
I like it so far.
Me too.
All right. That is all that we have for you guys today. Thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of the Booktown Fantasy Podcast. If you would like to keep up with us on other platforms, then all of our socials are linked below in the episode description. And yeah, stay nerdy, everyone. We'll catch you all next week for House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 2.
Woo.
Bye.
Bye. Cheese finds Helaena with oh my gosh, I can't. It feels weird saying cheese as a person. It's really hard to read it like that. Okay. And that he has also chosen her that he is all, oh my gosh, that he. Ah! Okay. I don't like Lady Massaria. I never want to talk about her. I only want you to talk about Lady Massaria.
But I'm like,
I can't stop thinking about it now. Oh my god.
Okay. What does Cheese do? He kicks his dog.
Blood kicks the dog.
It was Blood? Oh, shoot, I missed that. Okay. What? I thought it was Cheese.
Why would Cheese kick his own dog?
Because he's pissed?
Yeah, Blood kicked that.
Oh, it was Blood? Oh, you're right. Why would Cheese kick his own dog?
Would Cheese kick? Who kicks their own dog,
Oh, fair point. Okay. Okay. Let me restart that. So
I thought you got this, Lorraine. Are you good? Can you do this?
We'll catch you all next week for House of the Dragon.